Hi, and welcome to the iSing Mag webinar on practice strategies for singers. My name is Lynn Hilton. I'm the iSing founder. I'm also a vocal performance coach. So let's get into this webinar. Now, I had actually done this webinar live, but unfortunately forgot. I recorded it, but for some reason the technology let me down and the recording kind of wiped instead of getting saved. So this is not interactive. In the live webinar, obviously there was some interaction with some questions, and I'll try and remember what those questions were and bring them up, and also some comments that people made to make this a little bit more interesting and not just about me talking. I'm going to do some intros, so in case you don't know me, just talk a little bit about why I'm talking about practice strategies and how I've had to figure that out for myself in my teaching and also in my own instrumental and vocal practice. I'm going to ask you some questions about your current practice strategies and your challenges, and also talk about common challenges that I've encountered with my students and myself as well. And then I'm going to delve a little bit into the practical tips that I introduced in my article on iSing as well, and elaborate a little bit on them, and then dig a little deeper and zoom in on one particular aspect of how you might be able to make your practice sessions much more deliberate and useful. Obviously the Q&A isn't available because this is not a live session, but if you have any questions, I will make sure that you know how to get in contact with me to ask any questions. I love quotes, and here is a great one from Aristotle, where he says, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." And this is something which I truly believe people don't understand quite often, especially singers, because we have this culture of somehow you're born to sing and you have whatever you're born with. You can't get any better or worse, maybe, and that there's no need to actually work on it. And then singers will get frustrated because they're not reaching the kind of excellence that they believe they should, or maybe their voice isn't working as well as it used to and they're not sure how to get back to that place anymore. So, when it comes to getting better at anything, it doesn't matter whether it's singing or not. It's really important that you're actually working on it. So if you're not doing any work, then it's very unlikely you're going to get to that place of excellence that we're all seeking. We all want to be good. We want to be good at what we do. We want people to recognize our achievements. But if we're not actually working on it, then basically we're not going to get any better. And what Aristotle is saying here is that it's actually a habit. So it's a habit of practice, a habit of working at your excellence, not just something that happens randomly or by chance. So a little bit about myself. I started off in my youth as an instrumentalist. I started playing instruments when I was probably about 8, and I was classically trained originally. So practice was something that was well ingrained in me, and because I was doing orchestral music, I knew that if I didn't actually do the work, I wouldn't be able to maintain the standard that was required of me. And you feel, sometimes when you're in an orchestra, very vulnerable. I was a clarinet player, so I was one of 3 players, and it wasn't like violins where you could potentially hide a little bit. You had your part, and it was very obvious if you didn't do the work that was required to make sure that you could actually perform the piece. So my practice strategy started quite young, and I think the classical world does actually look at practice a little bit more than, say, the contemporary world, and that's something that I discovered as I sort of got more and more into contemporary singing. I decided that music wasn't a career for me. Well, I couldn't see it as being a career for me, and I think partly that was because I was looking in the wrong genre and the wrong instrument. And to be honest, I was really interested in becoming a nurse, so I trained as a nurse and worked as a nurse for a few years. But all that time I had got back into music, and this time I was singing, and I loved it. I would sing at any occasion and moment that I was given the opportunity to, but still hadn't quite seen it as something as a career until one day I was offered money to sing at a wedding, and suddenly the penny dropped that actually I could potentially earn money from singing. And so I started to explore that a little bit further and realised that actually music and singing was something that I did want to do as a career. And so I progressively moved into that sector, retraining, eventually doing a BMUS education in jazz and working as a jazz vocalist. I love teaching and found myself teaching singing, and eventually ended up head of a vocal department here in the UK. So obviously all my initial training and singing happened in Australia, and then I moved over to the UK to set up my singing studio because I wanted to work with the more professional end of the market in a hub, which London obviously is. And my reputation built to the point where actually I was asked if I would be the head of a vocal department, and I took that role on for several years. And in the meantime was still teaching privately, obviously working with performers, and at the school I was working with a lot of singers whose goal was to become professional, either as an artist or a session singer or backing vocalist or function singer. After I left the music college, I discovered that there was a master's program at UCL that I thought would be a great integration of my medical nursing and health background with my performance and singing experience. So I did a master's in performing arts medicine, which is like sports medicine but for artists. And around the same time, because I think I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment, I decided to set up iSing Mag, partly because I had wished that there was something like that around for me when I was starting out, and also because I realised there wasn't really anything available for singers who, unlike guitarists or keyboard players or drummers, you know, if you wanted to go to a hub or a good resource as a singer, it's very difficult to sort of filter through everything that's on YouTube and on the website. And also I have great contacts and a network, and I thought, let's make use of it and make a place where singers can come and feel safe and also get the information that they need to help them get better as singers and also to work in the profession. So that's how iSing Mag was born. Right, so enough about me. What about you? So do you practice? That's my first question usually when I work with a singer. And then I'll ask questions like, how long do you practice for? How often? Where do you practice? When do you practice? And do you have any specific strategies when you're practicing? Like, do you set goals, or do you have a structure to your practice sessions? Is there a process that you use? Do you incorporate rest? How do you measure your achievements, and where do you get your feedback from? So a lot of contemporary singers don't actually really practice, or if they do practice, they're practicing the songs. They're not actually working on their voice, working on range, on strength, on vibrato, on agility and stamina. They're actually just singing the songs through, and whilst obviously that does help, it's not necessarily going to physically progress your voice. The other thing which interests me, as I said here, is how long do you practice for? Are they short sessions, a couple of times a day, or just once a week in a long session? Because the frequency and the length of your practice actually makes a difference to how you're going to progress. We're working with blood and bones, really. Our vocal folds have muscle in them and epithelial tissue, tendons, there's joints in the larynx, there's a little bit of bone and mostly cartilage. And if we overwork our vocal folds, then it's likely that they're going to get fatigued, they might get a little swollen, and then we're going to end up with a hoarse voice, or we're going to find that our voice conks out, or maybe we lose some range. So we can't practice the way that maybe instrumentalists do, for hours on end. But I've got a great strategy that you can do where you're not going to actually increasing the workload on your vocal folds too much. So we'll talk about that later. How often? Some people leave it until the weekend and then just do it on the weekend and then they go to their gigs. Other people will go throughout the week. It is much better to do short, frequent practice sessions and to disperse it regularly throughout the week. Now, with my singers, I also will want to find out how much are they performing, because when you're practicing, you're using your voice, so that's increasing your voice workload. Unlike an instrument, which when you put it away, it goes away and it's rested. With our voice, it's never rested really, other than when we're sleeping. And even then, if you're like me and you talk in your sleep, it's still at work. But we need to be careful, that we're not overloading our voice with the stuff that we're doing during the day. Maybe we've got a day job or a part-time job, or maybe we're teaching, as well as doing our practice sessions, our warm-ups, and then gigging. So making sure that we're monitoring how long we're practicing for and how often. When I ask somebody where do they practice, I'm interested to know, do they have a place where they can go and concentrate and work privately? Are they able to sing from home? Because sometimes, especially in London, people live very close to each other and the walls might be thin, or you might live in a house full of other people and it's a bit difficult to practice at home. I know people who practice in their car, or maybe they have a room that they rent that they go and practice in. So that kind of that can sometimes be a hindrance to practicing, not being able to have a place. So we'll talk about how you can overcome that later in this webinar. When is really to ask, is the time that you're practicing the best time for you? Have you really thought about, are you better in the morning or not so good in the morning? Sometimes people wake up and their voice is very swollen and hoarse because they have reflux. So practicing in the morning may not be the best time. It might be better to wait till later when the vocal folds have settled down a little bit and are not so swollen and not so puffy from lying down and dealing with this acid. Or maybe your voice gets very fatigued during the day, and so it's better to actually just start up with a warm-up and get it ready for the job at hand. So it might be that you're doing a job where you have to talk a lot during the day, and so maybe you should do some practice and warm-ups stuff before you do all that, so that your voice isn't starting out cold. When I look at strategies, it's really important to be setting goals so that you have a way of measuring your progress. It's important to know where are you going with what you're doing, and understanding that actually if you work with a structure, and I'm going to show you some ideas that I give my students on how to structure their practice sessions, you're more likely to progress. Rest is a really important part of our practice strategy, and it might just be that you want to rest vocally, or maybe you want to rest mentally. Because if we're really practicing correctly, with using that more deliberate practice strategy, it can be really focused and require a lot of concentration. So we need to give the brain a break so that it doesn't get sort of overwhelmed or stressed. You probably know that if you're not well rested Your voice might feel tired, or you lose concentration. Sometimes we make mistakes when we're tired, so it's important to make sure that you factor little rest sessions in your practice session as well. Measurement's important because otherwise how do we know that we're getting anywhere? So figuring out how can I measure my progress, and we'll talk about how that's possible. Feedback, once again, is a very important part of practice strategies. Whether you record yourself and give yourself feedback, making sure obviously that you're being objective about it. Or maybe you have a coach or a teacher that's going to help you and give you some feedback on how you're progressing. And maybe you and your teacher have set out what the criteria are and what the measurements are and what your goals are. You might have done that together, and then the teacher can also contribute to helping you figure out whether you've managed to achieve those goals and move forward. Current challenges. We all have challenges. For the most part, I don't know about you, but it seems like time is constantly running away. When do I do my practice? When do I have the time, with all the other stuff that I need to do in order to maintain my career and balance family and, have time off? Or maybe you're doing another job as well. Another thing, as I said before, might be finding the right place for you to practice, and it might take some effort to find somewhere that actually works for you, where you can feel safe to make whatever noises you need to, and be loud. Another challenge is not having a process or a strategy or measurement or feedback. And you may find that there are other challenges that you have as well, like maybe you don't know what to practice. So these kind of challenges, it always helps to have somebody giving you some advice to say, this would work for you and you need to be focusing on these exercises in order to achieve whatever your goals are. Here's another quote. And this is really relevant. I think a lot of people think that practice makes perfect, but actually it really is only perfect practice that makes perfect. Vince Lombardi is a coach, as you can see here, a football coach from the States, and like very many great coaches or sports coaches, is often quoted. And this quote, I think, is really significant here when we're talking about practice. If we don't practice the correct way, all we're doing is creating bad habits. So we have to know that we're practicing correctly and that the technique that we're using or the processes that we're using or the strategies are actually helping us move in the right direction. I thought it might be useful to understand how we actually acquire skill. It's not really rocket science, I don't think. I'm sure when you look at this, it makes quite a lot of sense. We start as a novice where we don't know anything, and maybe we're not even aware we don't know anything. And then as we start to get a little bit better, we become a beginner or advanced beginner. And then when we do it repeatedly, we become competent, then proficient, and then expert. So we're constantly moving along this spectrum. And of course, at any one time, we might be a novice in one thing and we might be an expert in another, or we might be advanced in one thing and proficient in another. So it's not just I'm always a novice. It's like if I've just started something new, like a new language, then I'm going to be a novice. But if I'm working, on my songwriting, which I've been doing for 20 years, then I'm more going to be towards proficient and expert. Here's a quote from George Harrison where he says, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you." And this is really about goal setting. So if you haven't figured out what your goals are, you'll just end up going down any path and ending up anywhere. You won't go in any particular direction. You may not even go in the right direction. You might go in the opposite direction. So if you don't set goals, how will you know which roads to take and which paths and how to get there? In my article on the website called, I think the same name, Practice Strategies for Singers, I identify 10 top tips for practicing. They are identifying your motivation, setting specific goals for improvement, setting challenging practice tasks, slowing it down and chunking it up, maintaining conscious control and limiting practice time lengths, repeating, getting feedback, making sure we sleep, doing mental practice, making an emotional connection, and finding someone to be an accountable buddy, or maybe even forming an accountability group. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those areas a little bit further. So if you don't know what your motivation is, you're going to find it very difficult to continue down this rather hard road of doing tasks that can be tedious, boring, or even, difficult. So being motivated and finding out what your motivation is really paramount to making sure that you're continuing to progress and put in the work that's required for you to reach your expert level. Your motivation might be about, some people are about running towards something and some people are about running away from something. I mean, you will know best, but it's worth maybe writing these things down to say, the reason why I do this, my purpose is, my why. And later on, I'll talk about some books that I think are really helpful in identifying things like how to practice or how to get improve or motivation. And one of them is specifically about finding your why. And I think this works really well in this section. Setting up specific goals for improvement. I talk about using SMART goal settings. So specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So making sure that the tasks that you're putting have very specific tasks, don't be too general, and finding a way of figuring out how that is measured. How will I know that I've achieved that? Is it because I can sing that note? Is it because I can sing the song from beginning to end? Is it because I can last the gig? Is it because, whatever it is that will determine whether or not you've achieved the goal. Making sure that it's achievable as well is important. Some people set goals that are way, way beyond their reach right now. It doesn't mean you'll never reach it. It's just that you've got to be realistic about, is that achievable in this, time span that I have, whether it's a month or a week or a day or a year, and then making sure that you've got some sort of timeline on it. So you're not kind of going on and on and on without any way of checking in that you've actually given it a good timeline. And that timeline might be 1 week, or it might be 6 months, or it might be a year, it might be 5 years. It really depends on what the goal is and what the skill is that you're working on. Setting challenging practice tasks. So you want something to be challenging but not too challenging, because if it's too difficult, you're going to lose interest, you're going to get frustrated, and then you'll probably give up. So you want something that's just challenging enough that it's going to push you a little bit further down the track, and then if it's too easy, you're not going to progress. If we slow something down and we break it up into small parts, it's much more achievable, and it's also less overwhelming. And this is what I was talking about earlier, when singers sing the song over and over again. They're not actually working on the area of their voice that needs it. So I will get a singer to actually take just a small segment, and it might be a few notes, or it might be a phrase, it might be a bar, work through all the different exercises, whether it's using sounds, consonant vowel combinations, slowing it down, maybe even just removing the rhythms, just singing the notes and the words, or singing the notes and a sound, and then gradually building up. So then you might add, half a phrase before that, and then you might add another half of the phrase. So you've got 2 phrases coming into that area that you're working on, and then you might go a little bit beyond. So you're just incrementally increasing the amount of area that you're working on until eventually you've got the whole song sorted out. This is much more achievable. It's very overwhelming to have to think, I've got to do it all in this moment. And in your practice, that's the time when we can do this. Maintaining conscious control means that we're actually in the moment, that we're concentrating, we're not drifting. You can't be doing other tasks while you're practicing if you want to achieve success or move your voice along. You need to really be focusing on the practice session. So not doing the dishes, not driving, not, watching telly. You've got to actually just focus on that. And that becomes difficult. So don't be setting yourself, I've got to do this for an hour. It's going to be a lot easier to maintain that very focused control and conscious control in 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and then have a couple of minutes break and then come back to it, or maybe a couple of minutes break and then go to a different exercise. Limiting the practice length times so that you're not feeling overwhelmed or actually pushing your voice too much. So our body responds a lot better when we're doing short bursts of exercise or activity on a frequent basis. So repeat. This is all about improving the motor skill, making sure that the muscles and the whole mechanism of the voice does this so many times it becomes automatic. When we're repeating, we're helping to build neural pathways, and then we're helping to build myelin on top of these neural pathways. So the thicker the myelin on these neural pathways, the more automatic and the more ingrained process is going to be, so that by the time you get on stage, it's going to be so automatic and so in your system that you can focus on other things. One of the reasons people often get performance anxiety is because actually they haven't done the kind of practice that they need to. That means that their body is so familiar that it doesn't even have to think. You don't have to consciously think about what you're doing. You can focus on your audience, or making sure you're getting on and off the stage correctly, or doing all the movements that are required, remembering the lyrics. Well, actually, really, I suppose part of the practice is remembering the lyrics to the point where you don't have to be thinking about them. But being more emotional, being able to bring in dynamics and communicating with your band, focusing on these other things which are much more about the art. So this is only done through repetition. That's why if you look to sports, you'll see a sports person repeating the action over and over again. And the other thing is that they'll always get feedback from a coach or a trainer to see, am I actually doing this the most efficient way? Is there anything I can do to improve? Did I do it better from the last time? Is there something else I could be adding into it? Should I be, challenging myself a little bit more? So getting that feedback can be either, as I said before, from someone else, whether it's a coach or a trainer or a teacher or a friend who you trust their opinions of, or you could be recording yourself, video or audio, and listening back. But you need to make sure that you're doing this in a very objective way, because if you're being subjective, you're probably not going to actually learn anything. So sleep is very important for our body to recover. Our body and our brain need that time to go into recovery and also to process things. So the brain will process ideas and concepts and problems, and then also leave room for learning more things. So if we don't sleep, I'm sure you've had this experience where you've not had enough sleep. You tend to be grumpy, you can't concentrate, you're impatient, maybe you make mistakes, and certainly, learning something new when you're in that state is very difficult, because quite often our memory doesn't work very well. So making sure that we're getting sleep and that we're not getting too tired or fatigued. Now, the other great thing about sleeping well and sleeping, enough hours is that actually it will also have a great impact on our general health and our longevity life-wise. There are actually studies that show that if you sleep well, you actually live longer. Mental practice is really interesting. They've done a lot of studies, especially in the sports world, but also in the music world, to show that actually if you practice mentally, you're still laying down the same kind of neural pathways and myelin that you do when you're doing physical practice. It may be not quite as 100%, but it's about 80-something%. And so mental practice can't be dismissed. So mental practice is great if, say, your voice isn't very well, you're feeling tired, you can't actually sing physically because you can't make noise, or maybe you're traveling. But of course, with mental practice, it's not about just imagining doing really well. It's about actually going through mentally through that process of how does it feel, what does it sound like, what does it look like? And usually you have to have at least done it or know how to do it correctly in order to do mental practice correctly. So one way that I sometimes suggest singers do it is to make sure they've got a recording of the exercise or the song done in the correct way, and you plug in, you have a listen through your headphones, and whilst you're listening, you're literally sitting there imagining that this is all in your body, that you're singing, and that you can hear it, and that you can see it in action, and you can feel it in action. And interesting enough, we will mirror the actions that are required in order to, to imitate what we might do if we were doing it actually live. So that's really interesting to go into mental practice. And one of the participants, when I was doing this live, was saying that she actually did that when she had to learn something on the piano for a gig, and she didn't have time to practice it physically, so she was practicing it mentally, and then the first time she played it on the piano was actually at the gig, and she was like really impressed with the fact that she was able to do it in spite of the fact that she'd never done any physical practice. Having an emotional connection is really vital when we're practicing as well. I'm sure you've experienced before that when you're excited about something, you're enjoying it, you're happy, it doesn't seem like it's hard work, and the time goes very quickly. So making sure that you figure out what's your emotional connection to what you're doing. Now, maybe the practice isn't so enjoyable and maybe it doesn't make you happy, but it might actually take you to a place where you know that you can perform your best and you can connect with your audience, you can have fun on stage, and that's what makes you happy. So you're thinking about the fact that your practices and the work that you're doing on your voice and your musicality and your performance is what's going to give you that end result. So remind yourself when it's all becoming more difficult, or you're just like, oh, I can't do this one more time. Just go, actually, ultimately, I'm going to feel amazing when I can just really dig into this on stage and connect with my audience and deliver an awesome song or have a great gig. So the last thing is about accountability. There's a reason why things like AA and Weight Watchers and Slimming World work. It's because they have accountability groups and individuals. So find somebody that you can, who's on a similar trajectory to you, who also is wants to work in the way that you do, to be accountable. There's always going to be a time when you're feeling low and they're not, and so they'll be able to boost you up, and vice versa. And the other thing is, it's great to have somebody to remind you about the stuff that you are doing really well, because it's very easy to get down on yourself for not having achieved X, Y, and Z. And one of the people in the live webinar was saying that they have an accountability partner and they meet every week, and she said sometimes her friend will be saying, oh, I'm really down because I haven't achieved these things that I set myself, and then her friend will say, well, actually, but look about all these other things that you achieved, even though it wasn't exactly what you set yourself, last week, you still actually achieved something, and actually, some extra things happened that you weren't even thinking about. So it's really great to have someone to point those things out. And also, when you're setting yourself a goal, when I've been in accountability groups, what I've really found useful is that I know I've got to have that meeting or that get together, on Monday. And so it really helps push me to actually going and doing the thing that I said that I would do during the week. You might do that on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, but I certainly wouldn't do it any less than monthly if you want to progress. And I feel, especially if you're really trying to achieve something, that weekly is probably the ideal. Another quote. This is from La Mary, who was what they called exotic dancer. I don't think it meant what it means now. She actually was an American dancer who went and learnt ethnic dances like Indian dance, which you can see she's dressed there as an Indian dancer, and she brought that to America. Anyway, she said the only reason for mastering technique is to make sure the body does not prevent the soul from expressing itself. And I think that is really, it's really spot on. Ultimately, we want to be on stage or in the recording studio or in the job, just focusing on being creative and expressing our soul or expressing what's in our heart. If we're worrying about our technique when we're on stage, we're not going to be able to focus on those things. We're not going to be able to focus on the performance and the connecting. We're going to be just focusing on, am I going to get that note? Will I remember all those words? When do I have to come in again? And what's the next song? So making sure that we work on our technique before we go on stage so that it's second nature will mean that we can have a very creative and emotional, expressive experience on stage. A few other considerations with regard to practice. Understand that singing and performing uses both gross and finer motor skills. So we're talking about the nervous system, we're talking about muscles, joints, and coordination. When we're when we're sort of thinking about the voice, we have to use what's called a proprioceptive viewpoint. We can't see our instruments in the way we can see our hand, for instance. So I know, what my hand's doing. I can see what it's doing, but I could actually hold it behind me, and obviously I can see it in the video there. But if I couldn't see it in the video, if I was closing my eyes, I would still have an idea of where my hand was in terms of where it is in the air and in space and the dimensions and the distance from me. I know that that's on my face, and I know that's maybe a meter away. But in our voice, it takes time for us to become proprioceptively used to what's going on inside. And the other thing is our vocal folds themselves don't have sensory muscles. So we have to find other ways of knowing when our vocal folds are closed or open, or how to pitch. I mean, it's really quite amazing that we can sing at all, given how little, external control we have over our instrument. But when we're talking about muscle and the nervous system, that requires motor skills, require practice and development. And then once we've practiced and we've developed them, we need to maintain it to keep it toned. Conscious awareness often hinders. So if you're thinking about what you're doing, it may hinder your performance when you're on stage. A lot of artists, who are really proficient at what they do, will say they don't really think about it. If they're playing an instrument, or if you're talking to an athlete who's out there doing a race, they're not thinking about putting one leg in front of the other, or, I'm going to, leap here, or, I'm going to pull my hand back to a certain amount and then have a certain velocity, to throw that whatever object I have. They're not thinking about that. That's all the stuff that they've done prior to the actual competition or race. And this is what we need to be doing as well, so that we're not having to be consciously aware while we're performing. It's a cognitive, emotional and physical process. So we're using our brain, our emotions and our physicality, which actually, it's a lot to bring together. And I think sometimes singers underestimate how difficult this job is and how much has to be involved in making a really great performance. It is hard work and it takes time. No matter what people think, there's no overnight successes. And if you put in the groundwork now, you will benefit from that as the time goes on. Look, if you're also then playing an instrument as well, you're not just focusing on your singing instrument, but you might be focusing on a physical instrument that you're playing. And that's not uncommon in the singing world either. And these require all sorts of different, splitting of the brain. And so it takes time to build up that coordination, and you need to give yourself that time. So as I said, I wanted to dig a little deeper into how you can make sure that you're setting great goals and you're practicing strategically. So here's a worksheet that I put together for my students. I first asked them to think about the more long-term goals. So where do you want to be in 5 years' time vocally, and what will you be doing? It might be that in 5 years' time your goal is to have your own band and to be out gigging, doing live gigs, or it might be that you want to be a backing vocalist and you want to be on tour with somebody, or it might be that as an artist you want to be in a place where you're actually singing your own songs, maybe signed, or having a publishing deal. Whatever it is, this is your long-term goal. And I think it's important to write down why you want it and how important it is to you. So I'll say to my students quite often, so out of 10, how important is this to you? Now, if it's not a 10, I do have to ask you, why are you doing this? Because if this is not absolutely the only thing you ever want to do, it's going to be very difficult to maintain the momentum and the motivation to keep going through the difficult times, because I'm sure I don't need to tell you there is a lot of rejection in this industry, and you're going to have to go through a lot of no's before you get yeses. So if this isn't the only thing, and if you're not totally passionate and committed to it, it's going to be very difficult for you to maintain that. What actions must you take in order to take you towards that 5-year goal? So thinking about sort of the gross things in the sense of I need to get my vocal technique together, I need to get more songs written, I need to have more experience on stage, I need to have X amount of lessons, or whatever it is. You're thinking about these sort of bigger picture goals. What resources will I need? Well, it might be I need to do this course, or I need to work with a singing teacher or a performance coach, or I need to do some songwriting work, collaborative work, or I need to go and have some guitar lessons. So I need to find a guitar teacher. What resources do you currently possess? I think quite often people underestimate, how important it is to actually recognize what you already have. We're always looking towards what we haven't got, as opposed to going, actually, this is the stuff I've already got control over, and this is the stuff I've already got sorted and is, well established, so that you're recognizing your hard work that you've already put into this moment. Then you need to ask yourself what skills, talents, and knowledge you'll need. That might be, you might decide that you need to do a course of some sort, or that you need to do some reading, or that you need to have some specific kind of lessons or training. What skills and talents and knowledge do I already possess? So what's relevant to your, ultimate goal? And so I think that's it. So those are the more general overall goals. Then on the short-term goals, these are the ones that are set sort of from 3 to 12 months. is a lot easier. 5 years seems like a long way down the track, and it's good to know kind of where you want to go and recognize also that these things might change as you go along, and that's okay. But it's just good to set yourself some goals to start off with. So vocal goals, number one might be to I want to be able to sing through my transition in a belted technique without my voice cracking or flipping, and I want to be able to sing or X song, or I want to be able to do 8 gigs a week without my voice falling apart. Whatever it is that you may decide that you want to do very specifically with your voice or your performance. Do I have the skills and talents needed? Can I learn them? Am I totally passionate about it? Once again, to do that work in order to get better, it can be really quite tedious. And if you don't have that passion driving you, it's going to be very difficult to maintain motivation. Then what is the first small step that I can take towards achieving this goal? And when will I take that step? And usually I say to students, make sure that that step's happening within this week. So within the 5 to 7 days of you actually writing this particular goal, you want to already be taking one small step. And it might be that you make a phone call, or you drop an email to somebody, or you do some research on the internet, or you actually go and find somewhere that you can practice, or you connect with someone who you can songwrite with, or you find somebody who's an accountability buddy. Whatever it is, you need to be taking that step. And then how will I measure my progress? What will my milestones be? So I'll know that I've progressed because I'll be able to sing this song without my voice cracking or flipping or conking out. Or it might be because I will have written 20 songs by the end of that 3 months. Or it might be that I've actually booked a gig. And the last one is, when will I reach my goal and say I did it? So give yourself a date. Now, dates can shift because, we don't really know will that happen in that exact date. But it just gives you an idea of what to work towards. Because if we don't have a date, then we might just continue wafting around and, never really achieve the goal. So I would say maybe write another couple of short-term goals that you can be working on, especially in that short-term 3 to 12 months. If you have too many goals, then it can be overwhelming. But if we just work maybe 2 to 3 goals over a 3-month period, and then you could do another 2 to 3 goals over another 3 months, and by the end of the year, you will have achieved 12 different things, or 9 to 12 different things, depending on how many goals you're setting. Okay, so that's these more generic ones, the long-term goals and the short-term to mid-term goals. So this sheet is about your practice session. It's several goals that you could be setting during your practice session. So a for instance would be, you want to work through your transition. So you might already have decided along with your teacher, or maybe, through your practice, that certain scales and sounds and instructions will help you focus on getting that transition really smooth and strengthening it. So say, for instance, some people use a long scale or an octave arpeggio or a 5-note scale or whatever it is. So you write down the scale, and then you write down the sound. So maybe it's a G with an AH. So G consonant, AH vowel, so ga. And you might say, I'm going to remember to focus on making that G sound very firm, so it doesn't sound airy. So it's not a ka, 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 but it's a ga, 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 so much more spoken. Then you write your starting note. So say you're working on a 5-note scale, and you're a female, your starting note might be G3. And then the highest note achieved, maybe you work up until D5, going up incrementally by semitone on each scale, and then you get up to the D5, and after that your voice starts to go very weak, or you can't maintain the closure, or maybe you feel like you're pushing your voice too much. So you might write that in your comments. Now, when I'm talking here about best score, scoring is not about judging. Scoring is about finding a way of gauging where did I get to based on certain criteria that I've set. So your criteria might be the sound needs to be consistent throughout. I need to make sure that it needs to be on pitch. I don't want it to be breathy. I want to make sure that it doesn't crack or flip, or I don't have strain. So when you ask yourself, what's my score when I did that scale? If you achieved all of those criteria, then that's 5 out of 5. If you achieved most of them, but there was just one area that really needs fixing, like it all worked well going on the way up, but it wasn't so good on the way down, you might go, well, that's sort of a 4. And if I work on focusing on that hard G sound on the way down, I'll probably be able to fix the descending sound and make it more consistent throughout. So you might set yourself 2 to 3 times to do this scale or this sound, and if that's working well, then you've achieved your 5 out of 5. If you feel like actually you've done it 3 times and it's probably not going to work any better next time, you might give yourself a 4 out of 5. And you would write down, what did I do well? So you might say, well, on the way up, I maintained that firm g sound, and nothing fell apart. I didn't get breathy. And what can I improve is that, okay, on the way down, I need to be able to maintain that consistency that I had on the way up. What could I do to improve the next time? Well, next time I need to make sure that I'm getting better chord closure on the way down, make that G sound a little bit more, maybe add a little cry into it, or it might be that actually I'm going to change the sound. I'm going to make it an N or an M. And so your new goal would be, next time I practice this, I'm going to do everything the same, except I'm going to add an M in front of the R instead of a G. It's really up to you how you, what you decide. You might go, actually, it all worked really well. The next goal session, I'm going to drop the G and just see if I can maintain all of that on an open vowel sound. So you do that for 1 to 3 goals, and that can be a practice session. Quite frankly, on that first goal, you might be working for 10-15 minutes on that area, and really focusing on making it work well. So you're going to be slowing it down, you're really thinking about it, you're recording it, listening back. Did I achieve that? How did that feel? How did it sound? How did it look? And then when you're ready, you move on to the next one, but you also have a place to go for the next time you're practicing. The other thing about scoring is that we're not thinking just about the scoring that we're achieving in that practice session, but we're also thinking about the score, that we want to achieve, say, in 1 month or 3 months. So you might achieve a 5 out of 5 for that particular goal that you set for that lesson, but overall, you know that you want to be able to do that right up to a G5. So right now, you're doing it to a D5 really well, but your 5 out of 5 for this particular sound over your range will be when you can do it right from the bottom end through to the top end without anything happening in between, and everything being consistent, and it feels easy, and it sounds strong and consistent and in control. So you're thinking not only about your score that you're giving yourself within the actual practice session, but also overall, what would be a 5 out of 5 in 3 months' time. And this way, you've got a way of monitoring your progress and also giving yourself a measurement for success. Here are my references that I talked about earlier. These are books that I've found very useful in understanding talent development and how to create effective habits and what motivates people and how the brain works, and how we can make sure that we're achieving our optimum performance and excellence. Start with Why is what was the book I was talking about earlier for helping you identify what your motivation is. And the Talent Code is one of my favourite books, especially the Little Book of Talent. There's lots of wonderful little tips there to keep you motivated and challenged. And I'll just open that book and then randomly choose a page, and it gives you a little exercise to approach your practice or your creativity with. Peak is a book by Anders Ericsson. A lot of people have heard about the 10,000 hours to becoming an expert. It's not quite what Anders Ericsson was saying. It kind of got misconstrued through popular books by people like Malcolm Gladwell, but definitely that's a part of it. But he really thinks that deliberate practice is very important in people's development of their expertise. And Peak is a very easy read, compared to some of his research, trust me, because I've read quite a lot of it. The Artist's Way is a wonderful way to start getting a daily routine going to help develop you as an artist. The Power of Habit talks about how we create habits, how we get habits, and also the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a really interesting read to find out what Stephen Covey, has looked at how people who've been very successful have achieved that, and he identified there were 7 habits that they all seem to follow. So that might be something you want to have a look at too, to see if you can incorporate that into your practices. And the Chimp Paradox is a very practical book by Stephen Peters, who is a sports psychologist and has worked with some really elite athletes here in the UK, people who work at Olympics sort of level. And he talks about the little chimp that we have in our brain versus the sort of logical brain versus the computer brain, and how the chimp will always dominate if we don't learn how to control it. So hopefully that's been helpful for you. Copy anything there. If you want me to send you the worksheet, then please drop me an email. I can be found at info@lynhilton.com. My website is lynhilton.com, and I am on social media at Lynn Hilton. I think on Facebook that my page is slightly different, something like Lynn Hilton Performance Coach or something like that. So it'll probably be quite obvious when you see it. Don't forget to connect with us in the membership. Hopefully you're already a member, and you can go in and make sure that you're catching up on all the other webinars that we've got there. We have free monthly webinars for the members. We have our all the articles that come out Monday through Friday, touching in on anything that really might interest a singer. And inside the membership is also the vocal warm-up course. Hopefully you've had a look at that and managed to find some useful advice there to help you with your warm-ups and cool-downs before you're singing. Always got discounts and special offers coming out of the membership, so keep an eye out in your emails for any of those ones as they come along. So before I say goodbye, make sure that you connect with us on iSing social media. You'll find us pretty much on all the social media at iSing Mag, and watch out for future webinars. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in contact. Spread the love about the magazine. We want it to continue and to grow and and help and benefit you and other singers. Happy and safe singing, and have a wonderful week ahead of you.